Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. Public schools are imploding in performance and attendance as parents seek alternatives that do not turn their kids into gay Democrats who can't read. Fortunately for the teachers' unions that public schools are built to serve, the one area that is growing is budget. The $1 trillion public schools charge to turn your kids into gay Democrats. Since pre-COVID, public school enrollment has fallen in America by 1.5 million. Truancy has grown from 1 in 7 kids to almost 1 in 4. Test scores fell by nearly a full grade level. So we lost 30 years of progress in 4th grade reading, while 12th grade is the worst ever. Yet spending per student rose from $13,000 a kid to $18,000, suggesting the only thing public schools know how to graduate is a budget increase. So the background is progressives ran a 100-year campaign to capture education and hand it to communist teachers' unions. Murray Rothbard actually wrote a book on this takeover called Education Free and Compulsory. The punchline being government schools was never about reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was an intentional strategy to ideologically capture the kids of, in particular, Catholics, who at the time did not see the government as a crusade. They just wanted the government to leave them alone. The progressives figure they're stuck with Catholics, but they have their kids too brainwashed into foot soldiers of the progressive revolution. So reading and math was the sales brochure, indoctrination was the product, and teachers' unions made it happen in spades. One study by Cardis found public schools swing kids 20 points Democrat compared to private and parochial church schools, at which point they're, of course, sent to a 4-year indoctrination center called a university to finish off the brainwash at the low price of $150,000. Sadly, turning education into indoctrination hits Democrats worst, especially inner-city Democrats. Last year, fully 23 Baltimore schools had precisely 0 students proficient in math. In Detroit, 96% of students lack proficiency in math. 95% cannot even read, but they do know their demi-genders. Meanwhile, school budgets in both are almost half above the national average. Now, it all sounds dire, but there is good news. 15 overwhelmingly Republican states, covering a third of all kids, have passed school choice bills where the money follows the kid and practice the parents. Meanwhile, parents are pulling out. Since COVID, the share of parents using private schools is up, while the share of homeschooling doubled, including homeschool co-ops that amount to the traditional one-room schoolhouse with parents calling the shots. All encouraging, but it still leaves 84% of the next generation stuck in government day prison. So what's next? If you grade public schools on the promise they have been a spectacular failure for 50 years, turning out kids who cannot read, can't math, and vote communist, but if you grade public schools on their actual goals, they've been a spectacular success, capturing a $1 trillion pipeline for the progressive revolution. Happily, Americans are waking up. A recent Gallup poll found just 1 in 3 Americans support public schools, down from most 20 years ago. In fact, a majority of Democrats think public schools are failing, and just 1 in 5 voters think public schools are preparing students for careers. Still, even if voters do understand public schools are destroying kids, $1 trillion talks loud in politics. It will be trench warfare to rescue the other 84% of kids. The average starter home now costs $1 million in a record 242 cities in America, triple the number pre-COVID, meaning if you're 40-something millennials living in the basement, they might be there a while. This comes from a new study by Zillow, and you might think that that's just Bidenflation talking. In fact, it is driven entirely by blue states. So Zillow found that since COVID, the number of cities in red states with $1 million starters went up by 2, but the number in blue states went up by 160. Now, this is interesting considering blue states are hemorrhaging population to red states, especially Florida and Texas, yet it's the blue states that are getting nosebleed house prices. The reason, of course, is you cannot build a house in a blue state. God help you in a blue city. environmental mandates, design mandates, labor regulations, zoning rules that make it impossible to build, and rent control that makes it impossible to make money as a landlord. To give a flavor, it might take 40 days to permit a housing development in Texas, but it will take you over a year in California. And again, God help you if they find a weird frog on your property. One California study found it costs between $600,000 and $1 million to build a single unit of affordable housing, as in housing for the poor. The end result is in Florida or Texas, more people means more homes. In New York or California, fewer people means higher prices. This puts an interesting spin on the army of millennials living in mom's basement, which recently hit Great Depression levels, because it's not an America thing, it is a blue America thing. More important, it means the housing crisis does not need 50-year mortgages, free housing for illegals, or greenlighting banks to lend even more money they don't have, all of which Congress is pushing. No, all it takes is turning blue regulation into red regulation. So get rid of the mandates, the restrictive zoning, the rent control. Of course, blues will not do this on their own since blue voters are brainwashed communists, but Trump and Congress control enough purse strings, meaning federal money going to states, they can start breaking the straitjacket from the top down. In March, Trump issued an executive order linking federal housing funding to getting rid of rent control and barriers in permits, coding, and land use. Restrictions of the order estimated add $132,000 to the price of a new home. Even Congress is taking a break from fundraising and giving foreign aid to kleptocracies with a new housing bill that simplifies environmental rules and frees up prefab housing. Still, they all need to do much more, refusing any money to cities that impose rent control, put a shot clock on permits, essentially shall issue for housing permits, take a drill baby drill script, and apply it to housing, knocking out every barrier, crony regulation, socialist experiments that's blocking housing in the half of the country unlucky to vote Democrat. So what's next? In a normal market, higher prices builds more houses, Econ 101. That's how housing works in half the country. Trump and Congress now have the power to make it true for the other half. That means taking on massive Democrat power bases, environmentalists, unions, municipal machines, and crony affordable housing nonprofits who will fight tooth and nail to keep 30-somethings eating ramen in mom's basement and rage voting Democrat socialist. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. Congress just handed out another $50 billion in foreign aid, lovingly doled out to 177 countries. Now, considering there's only 190 countries in the world, that means fully 96% of the world is getting a check from Washington. Basically, if we're not currently bombing you, we are currently paying you. Now, this is a very odd way to run an empire. Imagine the great empires of antiquity, the Romans, Song China, the Moguls. They did not, as a rule, pay their subjects. It's kind of supposed to go the other direction. In fact, given great slabs of the world sponge off our military umbrella, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Australia, Canada, of course Europe, we could charge them north of $1 trillion a year. The military budget could turn a profit. Instead, the entire world, well, 96% of the world, is getting paid. Now, a lot of this is hidden, either run through the Pentagon or it's lent as sweetheart rates with no expectation of repayment. a favored method of funding one of our main allies in the Middle East. And all this money is not to buy friends. Europe, for example, would hate us even if we didn't pay them. No, it's to feed Washington's twin uniparty megagrifts, military contractors, and left-wing NGOs. To illustrate, in March, the GAO reported 60 to 70% of foreign aid never reaches the targets. It gets siphoned off by left-wing NGOs so they can riot for racial justice or burn Tesla dealerships. In military, the grift is almost the entire check. Warmongers like Lindsey Graham brag about the fact that U.S. contractors get the cash, ignoring the fact that every ton of steel that went into a tank for Ukraine came out of a railroad bridge in Ohio. Our military welfare is so promiscuous that many wars now involve both sides using weapons we gave them. Last year, India and Pakistan squared off with F-16 and Apache helicopters you paid for. Turkey and Greece regularly fondle their F-16s at each other. Turkey feeds surplus American weapons to Azerbaijan, who's at war with Armenia, to whom we also give billions in weapons. The entire Iraqi military was built with U.S. aid before we bombed it in the dust. We armed the Taliban against the Soviets, then rearmed them when Joe Biden ran off tail between legs. Multiple wars in Africa are now American arms on all sides, including the Congo Civil War that's killed 5 million people. And, of course, Mexico, where the Obama administration literally trafficked arms to the cartels to the point 80% of cartel-heavy arms come from the U.S. Now, Trump promised to slash foreign aid, and to be fair, he did cut regular aid by a third, famously defunding U.S. aid. That's still two-thirds too much, but even that took heaven and earth to lawyer past the NGOs. Unfortunately, Trump increased the other half of military aid, especially to the Middle East. He tripled so-called development financing to $205 billion, not including hundreds of billions in grand schemes to rebuild Ukraine and the Gaza Strip that thankfully have not gone anywhere. So what's next? From Chicago and Baltimore to Appalachia and the Rust Belt, America's got plenty of mouths to feed before we start paying Azerbaijan. Polls find Americans overwhelmingly want to cut foreign aid, including 91% of Republicans. Unfortunately, in Washington, money talks when contractors and NGOs are in the game. Did the iPhone eat the kids? Are cell phones the reason Americans are not having kids anymore? A new study is making the rounds claiming cell phones are collapsing the birth rate, which has fallen a quarter since 2007. The argument being kids don't hang out anymore, so there's fewer opportunities to get drunk and do things one might regret in the morning. It is a cute hypothesis, but the problem is it's up against the fact that the fertility collapse is entirely Democrats. Conservatives are having the same number of kids they did in the 1980s, which is weird because conservatives do, in fact, use iPhones. So the study used the national experiment of the original iPhone rollout, which went city by city. The researchers correlated fertility trends, and voila. The problem, of course, is the iPhone didn't roll out randomly. It started with big blue cities like New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. So they were not measuring cell phones, they were measuring blue cities. This suggests falling births is not fate, it is liberals. Which matters because in the past 20 years, women have swung liberal hard, going from 28% to 40%, self-identified liberal, but according to Gallup, moving liberal on 87% of issues. A recent Pew survey found a majority of young liberal women think limiting children is good for their career, while nearly 70% of conservative women think you can have a good career even with kids. Another survey found the most important life goals of young women who voted for Kamala was career and spending money on luxuries. Children was nearly dead last. Incidentally, the most important goal of men who voted for Trump was getting married and having children. One survey from IFS asked women by birth cohort how many kids they're having. It turns out conservative women are unchanged since the 1980s at 2.1 kids, while Democrats are dropping a fifth of a child per decade, so 1.7 for mothers born in 87, 1.5 10 years later, likely 1.3 by the time today's 19-year-olds do their thing. Interestingly, conservative women actually want more kids, between 2.5 and 3, suggesting economic factors are limiting conservative kids, so housing costs, wages, especially for the breadwinner, but not for liberals who would just spend the extra money on more girls' weekends in Cancun. In short, it is not phones that ate the kids, it is phones that found the ones who are eating the kids, liberals. So its next, the fact conservatives are apparently immune to baby-munching phones suggests it is not the phones, it is liberal ideology, namely the feminist reframing of marriage and children as prison rather than fulfillment, replicated through 12 to 16 years of left-wing schooling that apparently leaves a mark. As for how to fix it, you can protect free speech so conservatives can share the joys of family. You can promote school choice so parents can free their kids from baby-hunting liberal educators. But the left has so completely captured the cultural institutions, media, and education, it is going to be trench warfare to protect the babies. A word from our sponsor. Stocks and even gold are all over the place. If you're ready to diversify, Abundant Minds makes Bitcoin mining simple, transparent, and human. You can deduct every penny thanks to Trump's big beautiful bill. It's a 401k for Bitcoin mining. Founded by husband-wife team Bo and Christine Marie Turner after losing $500,000 to broken promises in the mining industry, Abundant Minds was built to protect investors. You own the machines, and they make it turnkey with hosting in their facilities in Oregon. Pricing is clear with one flat monthly fee and no surprises, and they guarantee uptime so you keep earning day in, day out. If you want easy diversification without pressure, learn more at abundantminds.com/Peter to get some of your first Bitcoin mine for free as a gift to my audience. The biggest risk in Bitcoin isn't volatility, it is custody. Because Bitcoin removes the safety net, there is no bank to call, no reset button if something goes wrong. The reality is, most people are not properly set up. They hold Bitcoin but rely on exchanges, incomplete wallet setups, and have no real plan for privacy or inheritance. This is exactly what the Bitcoin way solves. They help you move from exposure to actual ownership, self-custody done right, privacy, inheritance, even running your own node, all set up with you step by step. They never touch your Bitcoin. They're your support team. Go to thebitcoinway.com/Peter to book a free call and go from where you are today to a much stronger setup. Now back to our show. Alan Greenspan has died at the ripe age of 100. As one wag noted, he did make it to par. Greenspan's passing set off a tsunami of tongue-bathing op-eds how the maestro central planned the American economy for close to 20 years, kicking off in 1987 when Greenspan used a stock market crash to turn the Fed into a Wall Street bailout machine where the bankers keep the wins and taxpayers and dollar holders eat the losses. Also known as the Greenspan put, and a big reason why boomers own everything while millennials share ramen with roommates at age 40. All the way through 2006 when Greenspan lit his last boom-bust bomb, ending in the 2008 financial crisis that nearly set off a second Great Depression. Unfortunately, the bailout machine Greenspan built is now a permanent feature, with every subsequent Fed chair pumping till it breaks and then bailing out what's left. So the background is central banks like the Fed are created by bankers as a counterfeiting cartel, which prints money but not so fast the inflation puts voters on pitchforks. Basically, a gasoline thief who siphons the neighbors a quarter gallon at a time instead of draining tanks willy-nilly, which would get him caught. The way central banks print is they let commercial banks lend money they don't have. They counterfeit the loans, and the Fed does this by promising to bail out the bankers if anything goes south, the so-called lender of last resort function. It is a permanent standing bailout. Then they limit the money printing using interest rates. The Fed sets how much loans cost. That's the quarter gallon. Lower rates and you get cheaper loans, which artificially boosts growth, generates more fees for Wall Street, and makes it cheap for the federal government to spend money it doesn't have. The problem is having an unlimited money printer's Frodo's ring. It attracts pressure to cut rates too far, which causes the boom-bust cycle of inflation and recession, and even more pressure from Wall Street to use that lender of last resort function to bail out not just the boom-busts, but speculation. Because it's an iron law of finance that more risk is more return, so if you tell gamblers they can keep the wins but you'll cover the losses, they will go all in all the time. And that's where Greenspan comes in. Starting with the 87 stock crash, Greenspan flooded the banking system with money, promising to keep flooding until every banker was solvent. Bankers went from conservative portly men in glasses to the 1980s sharks fueled by hookers and blow. Sharks who went on to fuel 13 financial crises under Greenspan, from the S&L crisis to the tequila crisis, the dot-com bubble, the 94 bond market massacre, 97 Asian financial crisis, the 1998 hedge fund bailouts, and the mother of housing bubbles in the early 2000s. In every case, the sharks made billions, the taxpayers and dollar holders got shafted. The smoke cleared, finance quadrupled to become the third largest industry in America, just behind manufacturing. Worse, it put Wall Street on a risk house of cards that every Fed chair now must feed. Our new Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, has already bumped up against that, apparently ditching promises to reduce inflation by pawning Fed assets, because Wall Street is now orchids in a greenhouse that cannot survive in the wild. So as next, Greenspan may be gone, but the bailout machine he built keeps growing. Fixing it is easy. Just announce the Fed won't bail anybody out if a bank fails. It's sold for scrap to more prudent bankers. Of course, that would set off an instant 2008 crisis, meaning it will not happen. The best Warsh can do is try and limit bailouts, but he's locked in a straitjacket. Alan Greenspan Wolf. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersanons.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.